After 4 years apart, a millionaire returns for his son. He freezes in horror, finding the boy locked away in a pigsty, huddled and clutching a rotten carrot as if it were his last precious treasure. His ex-wife offers a cold denial. Her new husband growls like a savage beast, and the entire neighborhood bows its head in complicit silence. But with a single act from the father, the entire web of lies begins to crumble. Why would a child be locked up like an animal in his own mother's home? Who allowed this to happen? And who is the one that truly deserves to be dragged into the light? "Ethan, what are you doing here?" He gave a slight nod. "I was just stopping by. I wanted to see Owen." Clarissa hesitated, a flicker of unease in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with a polite smile. "Oh, I'm afraid Owen isn't here. He's away at camp. He won't be back for a few weeks." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Camp? In September?" "Well, it's a survival skills camp. The school is running it." She suddenly clutched a hand to her chest, as if trying to block his view of the inside. It had been 4 years since the bitter custody battle ended, awarding Owen to his mother, Clarissa. Despite the millions in his bank account, Ethan Caldwell had been powerless against the court's decision. He had backed away, telling himself it was for his son's sake. He sent the child support checks, made calls that went unanswered, and lived with the widening void. Today, he had returned, needing to see for himself that his son was all right. He had no idea that just beyond that door, the truth was more horrifying than any nightmare he could have ever imagined. "Who is it?" A man's voice cut through the tension, booming from down the hall. A tall, broad-shouldered man appeared, wearing a polo shirt and khakis. Dale, Clarissa's new husband. Well, Dale said, a thin, smug smile spreading across his face. The ex-husband. Ethan didn't respond. Their eyes locked, cold as steel. "I just came to see Owen," Ethan said, his voice flat. "He's at camp, Clarissa told you," Dale said, crossing his arms, his head tilted. His tone was laced with sarcasm. "Funny you're just now remembering you have a son." Clarissa let out a nervous laugh. "Dale, please." Ethan took a step back, ready to leave, but just then a little girl came skipping down the hall, waving a doll. "Mommy, I want some milk." "This is Emily," Clarissa said quickly. "Our daughter." Ethan nodded, but his eyes swept over the living room again. There were no signs that Owen had ever lived here. "Well, I won't keep you," Ethan said, his voice now firm. He turned and walked back to his car. As he reached his car, a quiet voice called out from the other side of the fence. "You're Owen's father, aren't you?" Ethan turned. By the rose hedge stood an elderly woman with snow-white hair, her gaze direct and unwavering. Mrs. Thornton. He vaguely remembered her from years ago. Ethan walked closer. "Yes, I'm Ethan. I overheard your conversation," she said, her voice calm. "I just thought you should know. Owen is still here. He's not at any camp." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You mean he's here? Then why would Clarissa lie about it?" She nodded slowly. "I think, before anything else, you need to find him." He turned back, managing only a grateful nod. He rounded the back of the house, each step on the grass like walking on shards of glass. His heart hammered in his chest, drowning out the sound of the wind. The silence of the backyard was suddenly suffocating, and then he heard it. A faint sound, nearly swallowed by the wind, a choked sob. The sound was coming from the old, abandoned pigsty. Ethan drew closer. The sty's iron gate was fastened with a rusted padlock. Ethan yanked on it with all his strength. Metal shrieked, and the latch gave way. He took a deep, ragged breath, his chest aching with tension, and forced the jammed door open. The door creaked open, casting a harsh slash of light into the dark, musty space within. The stench of filth and waste hit Ethan, nearly making him gag. And then he saw him. Huddled in the far corner was a small figure, a threadbare, filthy t-shirt, bony legs pulled tight against a skeletal chest. His small hands were clutching a bruised carrot. A few scraps of peel littered the dirt floor around him. He was gnawing on it, not like someone eating a snack, but like a survivor. His eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, lifted to meet Ethan's. One cheek was streaked with dirt and straw. The boy flinched, shrinking back. I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp, as if he hadn't spoken in days. "I was just hungry. I didn't steal anything. Please don't hit me." Ethan froze. His entire world shrank to the size of his son's frail, filthy form. A white-hot rage that had been building in his chest was instantly smothered by a wave of numbing, soul-crushing grief. "Owen," he whispered, his own voice hoarse. "It's Dad." The boy stilled, his large eyes staring, bewildered. The ingrained fear was still there, but deep within them, a faint flicker of recognition sparked. Ethan slowly lowered himself to his knees on the filthy ground, bringing himself down to his son's level. He didn't dare move closer. He simply held out a hand, palm open. The silence stretched. Owen stared at the hand, then up at the man's face. His chapped lips trembled. "Dad?" That single word was enough to make Ethan's heart clench. A hot sting rushed to his eyes, blurring his vision. He blinked rapidly, fighting back the tears. "That's right, son," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. I'm here now. No one is ever going to hurt you again." The promise was like a key, unlocking the floodgates Owen had sealed for so long. The boy slowly lowered his protective arms. Seeing this, Ethan slowly reached forward, wrapping his arms around his son's frail body. But in that instant, a horrific reflex took over. Owen flinched violently, his whole body seizing up. In a motion that was clearly an ingrained habit, he threw his hands over his head, curling into a ball like a small animal bracing for a blow. The motion was a knife straight to Ethan's heart. He froze, instantly recoiling, his hands pulling back. The regret and pain on his face were absolute. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, his voice trembling. I'm sorry. I just wanted to hug you." "It's okay. You're safe. No one is punishing you." He remained frozen on the ground, keeping a safe distance. They stayed that way in a crushing silence. No words, no movement, only the ragged, hitching breaths of a traumatized child and the shattered heartbeat of a father. That night, in a hotel room 30 miles from Haddington, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, watching his son sleep. Owen was clean now, but the old and new bruises stood out even more starkly against his pale, thin skin. His sleep was restless. He would twitch and flinch, his limbs pulling in as a defensive reflex even in his dreams. The rage in Ethan had subsided, replaced by a cold, terrifying calculation. He hadn't become a millionaire by luck. He'd built his empire by anticipating his opponent's moves, by never striking when they were prepared. Call a lawyer now? Useless. He could already picture Clarissa, with her crocodile tears, spinning a tragic tale about a troubled son who ran away or hurt himself. Dale would stand beside her, nodding in agreement. They would paint him as the irresponsible father who vanished for 4 years, only to return and cause trouble. The word of a deeply traumatized child would mean nothing against a couple skilled at putting on a show. No, he wouldn't give them that chance, and he knew exactly what to do next. It was late, but a light still glowed from Mrs. Thornton's window. Ethan knocked softly. The old woman opened the door without a hint of surprise, as if she had been expecting him. "Please, come in," she said, her voice calm. Her living room was cozy, smelling faintly of chamomile tea and old books. "You found him," Mrs. Thornton stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "I found him," Ethan confirmed, his voice still raw with emotion. "Thank you. If it weren't for you, I don't know." "Don't thank me," she interrupted, her sharp eyes fixed on him. "Tell me what you're going to do next." Ethan took a breath. "I can't call the police yet. Clarissa will deny everything. I need you to help me, to watch them, to document anything unusual. I'll pay you." Mrs. Thornton held up a hand, stopping him. A sad, weary smile touched her lips. "Mr. Coldwell, I don't need your money." The old woman walked over to an old wooden cabinet, pulled open a drawer, and took out a worn, leather-bound notebook. She placed it on the table between them. "I've been retired for 5 years," she said slowly, "but I spent 30 years as a social worker, specializing in child protective services. I've seen the signs, the fear in a child's eyes at the sight of his own mother, the unexplained bruises, the isolation." Ethan stared, stunned, at the notebook. "I started documenting this over a year ago," she continued, her voice now laced with frustration. "I tried. I called family services twice. They came," Clarissa cried, "and said Owen was a difficult child and I was a nosy old woman. They left. The second time, Dale came to my house. He didn't say much, just stared at my dog and said it would be a real shame if something unfortunate happened to the ones we love. I think this notebook will be of use to you." Ethan took it, but he knew that to expose Clarissa, he needed more. He went to Marcus Thorne, a private investigator he knew through business connections. Mark's office was on the second floor of an old building, cluttered with paperwork and smelling of stale coffee. Mark was a middle-aged man with an unremarkable appearance. Ethan didn't waste any time. He placed a copy of Mrs. Thornton's journal on the desk. "I need everything on Clarissa Miller and her husband, Dale," Ethan said, his tone direct. "Finances, relationships, suspicious activities. I need hard facts." Thorne barely glanced at a few pages before nodding. "I understand." A few days later, Thorne called Ethan. "I have a preliminary report. We need to meet." In the office, Thorne slid a thin file across the desk to Ethan. "Two primary issues have surfaced," he began, his tone all business. "First, Owen's former teacher, Sarah Jenkins. She resigned abruptly in the middle of the last school year. Our records show that 3 days after she submitted her resignation, a $5,000 deposit was made into her account from a company linked to Clarissa's family." Thorne flipped to another document. "Second, there's the matter of the finances," he said, in the same flat tone. He placed 2 bank statements on the desk, side by side. "This is Clarissa's account. On the 15th of every month, your child support payment comes in." Thorne pointed to a highlighted transaction. His finger slid across the desk to the second statement, and within 24 hours, that exact amount is transferred to this account. Silence filled the room. Ethan stared at the 2 transactions, a perfect, seamless flow of money, down to the last cent. "Whose account is this?" Ethan's voice was low, barely a whisper. Thorne said nothing, simply tapping his finger on the account holder's name, printed clearly on the paper. "Dale Miller." Ethan fell silent. Every dollar he had sent, hoping to give his son a better life, had in reality become a salary for the very man who tormented him. Ethan now had everything he needed. It was time for the truth to come out. Emily's birthday party was the picture of fabricated perfection. The backyard was filled with laughter, clusters of pink and white balloons, and the rich aroma of barbecue. Clarissa, in an elegant summer dress, was the gracious hostess, moving among her guests with a radiant smile. Dale stood by the grill, playing the part of the proud father. They were the model family, a perfect picture painted in shades of deceit. Just then, Mrs. Thornton walked in, holding a small gift-wrapped box. A flicker of annoyance crossed Clarissa's face, but she quickly masked it with a social smile. "Oh, Mrs. Thornton, I'm so glad you could make it. A little something for the birthday girl," Mrs. Thornton said, handing the box to Emily. It was a toy police car. Emily grabbed it with delight, slamming it down on her playmat. And then, in a fleeting moment of childish energy, there was a loud crack. The plastic car shattered, a piece flew off. Dale laughed. "She's got a strong arm." And then, from inside the broken toy, a low, buzzing sound emerged, followed by a familiar voice, slightly distorted by a cheap recording device. "No one can ever know we locked him in there, Dale. Do you understand?" It was Clarissa's voice. The laughter at the party died. The background music suddenly seemed intrusive. Everyone turned, staring at the shattered toy. The smile on Clarissa's face froze. Dale's voice now crackled from the tiny speaker, gruff and annoyed. "The boy is a problem, and this is how we're dealing with it. End of story." Clarissa's voice returned, cold and ruthless. "And take care of that old woman, Thornton. And the new teacher, Sarah Jenkins. Make them shut up." The entire party fell into a dead silence. The guests recoiled, creating a space around Clarissa and Dale, as if they were standing next to a plague. Their faces shifted from shock to disgust. That's fake," Clarissa stammered, her voice trembling, but no one believed her. The proof was too raw. Dale, in a fit of panic and rage, lost all reason. He roared like a wounded animal, pointing a finger at Mrs. Thornton. "You damn old hag!" He lunged for her, but he never made it. Two plainclothes officers, who had blended in with the party guests, immediately intercepted Dale, twisting his arm behind his back. At the same time, the back gate opened, and Sarah Jenkins walked in, followed by a family services agent. Sarah's face was no longer fearful, only filled with the resolute determination of someone determined to right a wrong. "They threatened me," Sarah said, her voice ringing out clearly, aimed directly at Clarissa. "They bought my silence. But before that, I filed reports. I reported that Owen was falling asleep in class, that he came to school with unexplained bruises, and that he was always hungry." She looked directly at the stunned guests. "I documented everything, but no one listened, and I was too weak to fight." Clarissa's eyes were locked on Sarah, the horror in them now twisting into the hatred of a cornered animal. She had nothing left to say. At that moment, the family services agent, a woman with a stern expression, stepped forward. Her voice was firm and official, cutting through the chaos. "By the authority of the Department of Family Services, and based on the evidence presented, we are officially issuing an emergency protection order. Owen Caldwell is to be placed in protective custody, removed from the care of Mrs. Clarissa Miller and Mr. Dale Miller, pending a full investigation." Dale was already in handcuffs. The charade was over. In the ensuing silence, a small figure quietly stepped forward. Owen's small, clear voice rang out. "Mommy, why do you love Emily but hate me so much?" That dual question, with its direct and innocent comparison, was crueler than any accusation. It didn't just ask about the hate. It cut deep into the favoritism, into the love he should have had but was brutally denied. It was the rawest truth, spoken from a child's perspective. Clarissa's head snapped up, her disheveled hair failing to hide her tear-streaked face. Her eyes were wide, wild, locked on the image of the son she had tried to erase. Her chapped lips moved, trying to form a word, an excuse, an explanation, but no sound came out. The words caught in her throat. How could anyone answer a question like that? In that instant, the cold rage in Ethan melted away. Every plan, all the vengeance, became meaningless. His world now had only one focus: the small boy standing alone in the wreckage. He didn't look at the sobbing Clarissa. He didn't glance at Dale being led away by the police. They were the past. Ethan slowly walked forward. He gently held out his hand, and this time, Owen didn't hesitate. He ran into his father's arms. Ethan held him tight, a protective, encompassing hug, as if he could shield his son from the entire world with his own body. He buried his face in Owen's hair, breathing in the scent of life, of hope. After a long moment, he gently pulled back, but kept his hands on Owen's shoulders. He looked directly into his son's eyes, his voice low and steady, a promise meant only for him. "I've got you, son. It's over." He stood up, one hand still firm on Owen's shoulder. Then he spoke again, his voice just loud enough for the boy to hear. "Let's go home." Ethan turned and led Owen away. He never looked back. He guided his son through the stunned crowd, past the guilty faces, and out the gate of that house. The apartment was on the 11th floor of a luxury building. Every detail was immaculate, orderly, and expensive. But as they entered, Owen showed none of the excitement or curiosity one would expect from a child. He just stayed close behind Ethan, shuffling his feet, his eyes uncertain, as if silently asking, "How long am I allowed to be here?" Ethan opened a door at the end of the hall. "This used to be your room," he said softly. "Before." He trailed off. The boy looked into the room, which was covered in a thin layer of dust. Everything was still there: the small blue bed, the dinosaur-shaped pillow, and an old piece of paper taped to the door that read, "Owen's Territory." That night, Ethan cooked chicken soup, the first meal he'd made himself in years. Owen ate slowly. He didn't look up, and every time Ethan stood, the boy flinched. Ethan noticed Owen quietly tucking 2 pieces of bread into the pocket of his hoodie. He said nothing, just turned away and sighed. Around 2 a.m., a scream from Owen's room jolted Ethan awake. He ran in. Owen was huddled in the corner of the bed, thrashing in a silent scream, punching the blanket as if trying to fight off something invisible. Ethan didn't touch him. He sat at a short distance and said gently, "It's okay. Dad's here. No one will ever lock you up again." Owen didn't answer, but the thrashing stopped. He just gasped, catching his breath. The next morning, Ethan contacted Dr. Haley Knox, a friend from college who was now a child psychologist. When they met at a coffee shop downstairs, Haley looked at Ethan as if she'd never seen him so serious. "He still believes that everything can be taken away at any moment," Haley said, after Ethan recounted the previous night. "Children who've been abandoned don't need someone to fix them. They need someone to stay." Ethan nodded. "I was gone for 4 years. I was wrong." Back in the apartment, Ethan walked into his son's old room. He began wiping down every picture frame, every corner of the desk. He found a small box. Inside was a grey baby onesie and a torn photograph. One half was of him holding a baby Owen. The other half was Clarissa, back when they were still a family. He sat on the hardwood floor, staring at the photo. He remembered the day they welcomed Owen into the world, and all the days after, when Ethan threw himself into building his startup. He had missed most of his son's early years. Clarissa wasn't built for the life of an entrepreneur. She called him cold, emotionally distant. He, in turn, found her increasingly controlling and resentful. The marriage fell apart, and during the divorce, Clarissa was awarded full custody. Ethan had signed the papers out of exhaustion, out of guilt, and because she had promised to raise Owen with love. For 4 years, Ethan had sent the checks on time but never dared to get close. It was partly shame, partly Clarissa's constant deflections. "He doesn't even remember you, or you'll just confuse him." And he had believed it until he saw his son gnawing on a rotten carrot in a pigsty. The very next morning, Ethan signed an indefinite leave of absence from his company, handing over the reins to Miles, who had been with him since the early startup days. They moved to a small house in the suburbs, a 40-minute drive from the city. It was a single-story home with a reddish-brown shingled roof, surrounded by grass and a few lavender bushes that Ethan planted himself. Here, Owen no longer heard the click of a sty lock at night. He no longer had to eat in secret, in fear. No more dry bread in a plastic dog bowl. Instead, there were warm meals of scrambled eggs and sandwiches. There was a small, fluffy dog named Maple who chased squirrels in the yard. And there was Ethan, a father, carefully taking one step at a time to start over. 6 months passed, 6 months of tiny steps forward and quiet steps back. Their little house was no longer a place of unnerving silence, but had become a space of patience. One Saturday morning, as golden sunlight poured through the kitchen window, Ethan was making coffee when Owen, who had been silent all through breakfast, suddenly spoke. His voice was still small, a little hesitant. "Dad?" Ethan turned immediately, giving his son his full attention. "What is it, son?" Owen looked out the window at the patch of backyard that was just weeds. Can we plant a garden?" Ethan was surprised, a warm joy spreading through him. "Of course, that's a wonderful idea. But why do you want to plant a garden?" Owen didn't look at his father. He kept his eyes on the yard, his voice almost a whisper. In that shed, there was no Sunday." He paused, as if the words were caught in his throat. "I want to grow something beautiful." Ethan's heart clenched, then expanded with an overwhelming love. He walked over and knelt beside his son. "You got it," he said, his voice firm. "I promise you, we're going to grow the biggest, most beautiful garden you've ever seen." Owen looked up, and for the first time in a very long time, Ethan saw a glimmer of light in his son's eyes. Seeing the safety in his father's gaze, Owen shyly reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, folded into a square. The paper was wrinkled, with a small ink smudge at the edge, but the handwriting was neat, childish, and full of care. He handed it to Ethan. "I wrote this yesterday, for you." Ethan unfolded the paper. The first line caught in his throat. "Thank you for coming back." Below it, the writing was smaller, less even. "I will never forget the day you came for me. That day, I thought you were a dream, but you really hugged me, and I felt like I wasn't left behind anymore." Ethan quickly folded the letter and clutched it in his palm. He didn't need to say a word. His eyes said it all. 1 year later, the once barren backyard had been transformed into a garden bursting with life. Sunflowers stood tall, reaching proudly for the Sunday rows of tomatoes were heavy with ripe, red fruit. The scent of damp earth, mint, and rosemary mingled in the air. Ethan and Owen were pulling weeds together. Owen was taller now, his face free of the haunted look it once held. Occasionally, his clear laughter would ring out as he discovered a ladybug on a leaf, a sound Ethan once thought he'd never hear again. The boy pointed to a rosebud, just about to bloom. "Dad, it's going to bloom tomorrow." "I think so too," Ethan smiled, his heart filled with a quiet peace. Owen stopped what he was doing and sat down on the soft grass, looking up at the clear blue sky. He was quiet for a long moment, then turned to his father, his eyes clear and free of fear. He asked a question, so softly, that held an entire world. "Dad, am I going to be happy?" Ethan stopped everything. He looked deep into his son's eyes and saw the reflection of himself, of the garden, and of the wide-open future stretching out before them. He smiled, the warmest, most certain smile. "Yes, son," he said, his voice full of truth and love. "You are." And they sat there together, in the garden they had grown from the ashes, beneath the bright sun, knowing that the seeds of hope, once planted, would bloom forever.